So welcome, John, to your music industry. After the emails, I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Thanks.
To talk about Etch, to talk about Intec, and to talk about Jon Rundell.
Thanks. I'll just, before you start, it's not my music industry. It's
That's fine. You called me there. I was like, what's that?
No, I'm not like the king of the music industry. I wouldn't mind being it.
Yeah. So I found it captivating to look back and hear how you work part-time jobs when you're 15 to save up to pay for turntables, and to now be in Liverpool/Derby to play at Creamfield and much of many other festivals and gigs in between. Could you talk me through kind of your story and maybe highlight some of the best bits?
Sure. I mean, I was holding down about 3 paper rounds doing that. Basically, the real start of it for me was I used to play a lot of football. I was an associate schoolboy at a professional club and everything, and it was going quite well. But I always had music in the background at home as well. Like, I was really into all sorts of different music. I wasn't just into electronic music as it was at the time. I hadn't even really discovered it properly yet when I was playing that much football. But I then did discover it through my dad would encourage me to listen to music in his collection, and so I started on that. And that's really some of the music that he was listening to was like the Rolling Stones, the Kinks. That led me on to things like, for myself, like the Jam, and all those bands were slightly different at the time. They were doing their own thing. They were a little bit rebellious, kind of more mods really in that area. But so that kind of instilled that in me at a very early stage. It was about liking to listen to music and just enjoy it for what it is. So we would watch Top of the Pops every Friday night back in the day when it was, I don't know, is it even still on now? I'm not even sure.
I think it's only repeats now.
And Public Enemy were on, and the song they played, it just blew me away anyway. Like, and obviously I was watching Chuck D and Flavor Flav do their thing, and it was really quite energetic, and it seemed like they had something to say, and they looked rebellious as well. So I was kind of immediately drawn to it. But then what I was really drawn to, for some reason, was Terminator X on the decks. I was fascinated by it, and I was just like, I've got to find out more about what this is. And he was cutting and scratching everything, and not DJing in the way that we DJ today. Obviously, very hip hop kind of cultures. DJing is different to what we do, but it's still the thing that sort of captivated me to want to find out more. So I kind of started going to a few local record shops and just sort of not being taken seriously at all, because I was quite young, 15, 16 years old, and I just started talking to people really and just trying to soak it up and find out more. And around this time, the rave scene was really very legal by now, but it was still really kicking off, and it was really well attended, and there were events going on up and down the country like every weekend. So I kind of started going to a couple of them and going to some clubs, local clubs as well. And the paper round came. I needed to get a little sort of bit of income anyway. It's something my parents instilled in me, that if I wanted something, then I had to earn it. And it was probably one of the best things they did. And so I got 3 paper rounds because I wanted to save up and buy records, but I still never had anything to play those records on. So eventually I then got another job, which was just like a Saturday job on top of the paper rounds. I'd do that Saturday morning. I'd run off and play football for a local team Saturdays, and then I'd go and play football for the pro club on the Sundays. And in between that, I'd be kind of going to occasionally some clubs as well during off-season. And that's kind of how it really started. So I was underage, I was young, but I just wanted to learn everything I possibly could. And I was meeting all these new people, and this led me to being in the Zap Club in Brighton one night. On a Monday, they used to do a techno party there, and obviously Carl Cox was playing, and I got to meet a few of his friends. I didn't meet him. One thing led to another. We got along well, and eventually I met the big man. And it was nothing more than a quick exchange. Hello, how you doing? Yeah, wicked set. Thanks very much. Really appreciate the music and enjoyed it a lot. And that would be it for quite some time in terms of any sort of conversation.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I basically just started collecting all different types of records, different genres of music. Kiss FM was still really popular. I was listening to that a lot. So that was kind of where I was getting my shopping list from as well. And also just kind of local guys just giving me the heads up on some of the rave tunes that were out, some of the techno tunes that were coming out. And that was it, really. I eventually saved up for decks, and they were Sound Lab belt drives. I couldn't afford Technics.
Yeah, good old Sound Labs.
Yeah, and like it was driving me nuts for ages about why can't I get this beat in? Well, you know, and then eventually cracked it after about 6 months, and I was like, wow, this is the best day ever. Then I remember playing at a house party. It was the first time I ever played in front of people, and they had 1210s, and I'd never played on 1210s before. I clashed every mix. Like, it was terrible. It was an absolute car crash. It was the worst thing. I was really embarrassed. They only let me play for 30 minutes while people were still turning up. And I was just like, I'm really sorry. Like, I do, you know, I don't know what to say. They were like, don't worry about it, it's fine. They're only a couple of years older than me. Yeah. So I think most people will go through that. They have to go through it, really. It's like a baptism of fire. So that sent me back to the drawing board a bit. It did knock my confidence in my own sort of playing at home. And I never really bothered to try and play out in any clubs. I was just still soaking it up, buying the records, going to the parties. And that, for a long, long time. And then eventually I started playing a few little events. I played in this sort of semi-illegal party called Wonkers in Weybridge, near, not far from, sort of outskirts of London. And it was in a it wasn't disused. It was disused on the day because we were using it. But normally it was an MOT Test Centre.
Yeah.
And so they had they put the decks up on this kind of parapet thing where the cars normally go, and they raised it up, you know, so they could look underneath. So I was playing on top of that.
That's cool.
And I was like, I think I went to bed while the party was on, and then I went up there and I played at 9 o'clock in the morning for about 20 people. It was the best day ever for me. And I'd learned by then how to play on 1210s because I'd been going around somebody's house and kind of teaching myself and just learning the differences in the pitch and how sort of hard or soft to rotate the platter compared to the Sound Labs. And it was like a whole new thing. It was brilliant, and I loved it. And that's how it all started, really. And eventually I moved to London and started harassing promoters, and the way I did getting the gigs was really that I didn't know anybody, right? I knew a few people, but I didn't know really anybody in the club scene. So it was a case of just going out and getting to know people again. And by then, blank CDs were a bit of a thing. So I used to record mixes at home. And I managed to buy myself like a sort of pay-as-you-go, like little mobile phone, you know. I say little, it was like... You know.
Huge.
Well, yeah, but it wasn't big compared to... You know, it was what I could afford.
Yeah.
And I would top it up every now and again with like £10 a week, just in case anybody messaged me on it. And I'd leave my mobile number on these blank CDs, and I'd burn loads. I was working at Amato, a record distribution company at the time, so I was getting loads of records up front. And I would burn loads of CDs off, and then I'd take them out with me all weekend, and I'd just give them out to people in the clubs. I was giving out hundreds of CDs, like hundreds and hundreds. And it was costing me an absolute fortune. Yeah. But I was like, my idea with that was if people like what they're listening to, then they'll get in touch and I get to meet like-minded people.
Yeah.
And then other DJs that plays this kind of music too. And I was playing quite, pretty hard at the time, and the techno scene in London was really strong. There were parties like Lost. There was a lot of events at the end where I ended up DJing, fortunately, which was one of the best clubs London's ever seen, in my opinion. And at some point, loads of people started getting in touch with me, saying, where are you playing? We love your mix, we love your mix. They'd listen to it at home, at after parties, chill outs, driving in the car. Cars had CD players by then. Well, most cars by then had CD players.
Yeah.
And that's how it then became into another idea, because you have to kind of think outside the box as much as you can to sort of create value for other people too. Not just the value in what you're playing to give people a good time, but the value in, you're not just going to get a promoter book you. So my idea was, well, I've got these people getting in touch with me asking me where I'm playing. If I show that to a promoter, then I can show the promoter that I can bring people, I can bring a little crowd.
Yeah.
And if they can then come in for slightly cheaper on the door, then I'm helping them. I'm being helped because I'm going to get to play in a club, and I'm helping a promoter by bringing a crowd. So that was how I always approached it. It's like, how can everybody win in this? How can everybody be helped? I did that for quite a few years. I was never paid much, even though at one point I was bringing quite a lot of people into the club. So I think people have to be aware of that fact too. You know, there were a lot of DJs in London at the time in various different genres. And so the competition was fierce, and it's no different to today. Yeah. There's more DJs now than ever, because there's almost like there's 3 generations of it now. And everybody's fighting for the same slot. So it's kind of how do you add something to what you're doing, not just necessarily like, the way you're playing or what you're wearing or how whether you add something into your set that's different from other people, but it's like, how do you bring that value, really? And then be consistent after that once you're given the opportunity. And being consistent is really tough.
Yeah.
We're all human. And, there's frustrating times. There's times when you don't think you played very well. There's times when you think you should have prepared better, and you usually prove right. And that's it, really. I mean, this is how we come to be sitting today. And, I've been fortunate enough to play here at this wicked festival today. So, there's a lot that's happened in between that, obviously. Like parking cars in a hotel, and then Carl turned up, and he just 3 weeks ago signed my first records to Intec.
Wow.
I left the record distribution company, and I was like, I need to teach myself how to make music. And I was working with an engineer before for a while, but I was like, no, I need to teach myself. So I took a massive risk. I kind of made sure I had about 3 months worth of money. And then I started running out, obviously. Yeah. Because I wasn't working. I wasn't getting any, gigs weren't paying that well. So I got a job parking cars in a hotel, and then Carl signed one of my tracks and then turned up there for dinner, and I parked his car. He was like, what are you doing here? I was like, because we'd obviously got to know each other quite a bit more by then as well, and I'd seen him at festivals and clubs all around, UK and Europe by then, because I was starting to travel more to go to events as well and just show my face, and sort of wherever he was, I would kind of try and get there somehow. That was it really. And then I think maybe about 6 months later, the label manager at the time was moving on and asked me if I wanted to become involved in the label, because he knew I have my label management background. And I just jumped at the chance, and literally a week later I was sitting down with Carl and his manager, and we were talking about what we were going to do with the label. And that's how I became involved in Intec.
Yeah. So would you say that strategy of like not picking a target but finding someone who that maybe you want to find a mentor or find someone in the industry that you want to work with, don't stalk them but try and be active in there?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it to be honest, it could have been anybody. It was just that I'd met Carl at an early point, and I'd got on with some of his friends quite well, so it was a lot friendlier. It wasn't like I was just kind of going up to a DJ and going can I hang out? Is it all right if I just sort of watch what you're doing, or like come round, make you a cup of tea and just sort of learn how to mix off you or learn how to produce? It wasn't really like that, fortunately for me. There could be situations where it's like that for people, no doubt about it, and the artist that they're asking is friendly and open to the idea, and that's great. But I think, like anything in life, it doesn't matter what you do, everything's about relationships and like how well you get on with people. And I think another thing that I've always tried to do, but again I think it's just down to how I was brought up, is like I've never, am I allowed to swear, by the way? I've done quite well so far. Okay.
Let it out.
I've never taken the piss. Like, I've never asked for more than I should. I've never, taken drinks if there's drinks there, unless I've been offered. Things like that. And that doesn't sound like much, but people actually do notice those things. And they will notice if you're, like, a young, up-and-coming guy who wants to, or girl, who wants to get involved in music, but you're just being a pain. And you're being drunk all the time. And again, this goes back to the fact that this industry is a lot more grown up now. It's a lot more professional. It's a lot slicker than when I started, and it's good. It's safer as well for people at every level, whether you're a clubber, whether you're a DJ, whether you're on the production, building the stages, or doing the lighting in the clubs. And it's really important that you're level-headed and that you're just not in the way, and you're not being difficult, because there again are that many of us doing this. So for every pain There's somebody that will easily come along and replace you.
Yeah.
So that's another kind of thing that I've always done. But again, you know, everybody's different, and what's worked for me is not necessarily always going to work for other people. And I'm not kind of sitting here preaching this is how you should be. You know, everybody can take from it what they want, leave from it what they want.
Yeah.
You know, they just take a little bit and adapt it, or just ignore it completely and think I'm an idiot.
Yeah, I love that though, because when it comes to it, it's being human, it's being a person, it's respect. It's as you mentioned previously as well, like that exchange of value. Like it's being human. So that's great.
Yeah.
And on that sense of like kind of being respectable, being nice, is that really impactful in the A&R process of when you're signing people, or?
I mean, me being me, I would say yes.
Yeah.
Because that's just what I prefer. So I think with building the relationships, you get to know somebody. So you get to know what they like, what they don't like. And I think that's quite important. It's like my best advice to anybody who wants to get signed to a particular label, and it doesn't matter what music this is, I would still say the same thing, is that, you know, to be perfectly brutally honest, don't send tracks to info as an email address, because it's not that they won't be checked, it's just that people don't have time as much to also get back to you. And it's quite rare that something gets picked out of that to be signed. It does happen, don't get me wrong, but it is kind of rare. I would say you've got a much better chance, although this is a long process, is go to events, if that label does events. Yeah. And just start kind of hanging around near the booth, and, you know, don't try and get in the booth, don't try and get drinks at the booth, don't be messed up, you know, none of these things. Just, you know, go with a few friends who hopefully like the same music as you, and you all enjoy yourself, and then you kind of get to see kind of who's buzzing in and out of the booth. And then you can figure out, well, that's the tour manager, that's maybe the guy that, you know, runs the label, that's the manager, and get to know those people. Yeah. Yeah, of course, try and say hello to the artist, but get to know those people, because those are the people that will actually get you to the artist. And those are the people that if you get on with them really well, then it's an easier conversation to have. Yeah. You know? So again, can be a slightly longer process, and, you know, all you got to kind of do is just sort of go up to them and say, look, you know, been coming down to the party, you just, well, actually, even before that, just sort of smile at them every now and again, or say hello, or just say, oh, great party, you know, thanks for putting it on, or say anything, you know. But you will genuinely mean that, because obviously you're there to have a good time yourself, and the reason why you're there is because you enjoy what that label does, so you will be enjoying it. So everything you're saying is sincere. But then eventually, you know, look, you know, I've been making a little bit of music, I just wondered if I could, like, send it to you and just give me some feedback on it. Don't even talk about getting signed. Yeah, don't force it. Just let them give them the opportunity. And then bit by bit. And the thing is, you'll probably have to chase them up quite a few times when you see them. You will. It's just a fact. And you will hear no more than you hear yes. Still, even today, that's the case for me. And, you know, you want to try things, you want to get on with things, but not everybody's going to have the same opinion as you, and they're not going to agree with, you know, your viewpoint, or they're not going to want to sign your record because maybe they don't feel it's right for them. And that's it, you know, it's nothing personal. You can't try and take it to heart too much. Difficult not to, obviously, especially if everybody's telling you no, but just keep working on it. Like, an example for me personally to give was, I got signed to Desolate after sending Loco Dice tracks for 7 years. But I didn't give up, and I didn't stop, and eventually signed something. Yeah, and that 7 years can take a lot to keep consistency, isn't it? And that's the thing, you know, like that was that for me. Yeah. You know, it might take people 6 months, it could take people 2 years, it could take 3, but I think when you're in your early 20s, you have more time on your side as well than you realise. So you've got to try and slow your brain down and try and sort of not rush, because you think, oh, I've got to do it now, I've got to do it now, I've got to do it now. No, you've actually got a lot of time ahead of you. So just, you know, try and be organic with it, and try and sort of grow it in just in an organic kind of way somehow, you know. that would be my advice that I could give anybody and everybody about the best ways to get signed. And then eventually, you know, look, I've done this, I've done it just for you guys. You know, love to be on the label, you know? Big fan, love to be on the label. That's it. Just a few words, just be cool with it, and that's it. That would definitely work with me.
Yeah.
So if there's anyone who wants to be on Intec, then that would definitely work with me.
So to talk a moment about like music production, as obviously the approach matters, but then the music also matters to get signed. Do you ever see any regular kind of issues with tracks or things that aren't up to scratch to get signed, whether the mix down, whether the production, whether the synths?
I think the general production level of things that we've been receiving, certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, is actually really good. It's much better than it used to be. And I don't know if that's because perhaps there's more information available to help people learn how to produce. You know, you can go on YouTube. You have to only watch certain things on YouTube. You have to be careful because, you know, not everything's correct, but there are certain channels that have good reputations, and I would encourage people just to watch those ones. Just kind of not forget about the rest. But, you know, Pensado's Place is a great one.
Yeah, legendary.
Dave Pensado is just ridiculous. Like, and the thing is, he doesn't always talk about dance music that much, but the thing is, the science still is the same. With frequencies, with, you know, just mix downs, with spacing things, everything like to do with production. He's the go-to man. Like, that I would always say, go and watch that. The main thing that I think has usually stuck out for me, certainly in newer producers, is that either the idea could be there, but the arrangement's not quite there. It doesn't quite flow yet, or there's maybe certain moments in tracks that aren't quite as fluid as they could be. But that just comes with time and practice. I wouldn't say it was anything else other than that, really. But then I think also a lot of what we hear is pretty much the same as what's already out there, or whatever's popular at the time. And, you know, again, everybody has to start somewhere. I was that person. I used to do that. But if people can try and hone their own kind of vibe within a track and make it slightly different, then do that. You know, on a techno level, you know, I would say like somebody like Harvey Mackay came through, totally kind of different way of mixing a record, totally different way of just presenting its sound, but it was still techno. It wasn't really what was being played at the time, but it still connected with people, and people still saw something in it, and it did. His sound has done well, but now you know that even without sort of seeing him play it, or if you're watching other people, if you're really into your music, then you know that record's a Harvey Mackay record. Without even having to see it or Shazam it or whatever. You know, if you're a real hardcore music listener of techno music, then you know that. And I think that's the ultimate goal to try and work towards, really, with music production, is finding that thing so that people know that's XYZ record.
And how do you think producers can find that? Is it just through repetitive practice?
And making mistakes, because, you know, not all mistakes are mistakes. Some mistakes are happy mistakes. And you suddenly try something that you think that nobody sort of talks about or mentioned, or isn't really in theory supposed to work, but just try it anyway. And it literally comes from hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of essentially looking like you're just messing around.
Listen to that loop for hours on end.
You're not, but the thing is, you have to stay focused on it, you have to stay dedicated to it, try not to get distracted where you're doing that. So like a lot of the artists that I look up to as a production artists, that I've been fortunate enough to find out that that's exactly what they do, especially when they're approaching album creation. They literally spend days and days and hours on end, 12-hour days in the studio for like 6 months, just messing around. And then bang, there's 12 tracks. Because they get all those other things together and they make them all work. And, like Chemical Brothers today.
Yeah.
That's how they, you know, I mean, they may have spent longer than that, but you know, all these little sounds, you know, they've spent time just searching and researching other records or, you know, other vibes of music and thinking, well, how can we incorporate this into what we're doing? And, you know, just twiddling knobs and seeing what comes out. And then every now and again, there's going to be like, that's quite cool, that might work with this kind of beat. And then you start writing a beat around it or vice versa, you know, or you're trying to get something into the beat because the beat's really cool. You know, hours and hours and hours and hours.
It is what it is, and if people can't put that work in,
there's
they're
no
not going to get
shortcut.
anywhere.
There really is no shortcut. It looks like it online, but there isn't. And that's another thing I would advise as well, especially starting out. Just try and ignore everything online, like in a social media sense, because nobody really knows you're there anyway. So that's when you spend your time. Spend it quietly, not making noise about it. Just do it, and then, you know, get good, and then start to kind of create your accounts and start to get your music out there and just find and connect with like-minded people. But until that point, just experiment, just mess around, find your feet with it, you know, because you're not suddenly going to get a load of likes, you're not suddenly going to get a load of comments, because that's the way the world is.
And it is that, isn't it? It's not jumping too fast and throwing a track up that you're not happy with because it's out there forever. And
yes and no. I mean, if you just do it on a SoundCloud page, and you have, like, maybe actually just to go back on what I just said a little bit, set up a SoundCloud page, and then maybe just slowly get your stuff up there that you've been working on, and then it's a good way to get feedback, right? Instant feedback from people that you know are there to listen to music, not for any other reason. That seems like a sensible thing, actually, on reflection, to do.
Certainly. So unfortunately, we are coming to an end to our little interview here.
Okay.
But I'd love to end with one question we ask every guest. And it is, in the next, say, 5 years, what change would you like to see within the music industry or within electronic music?
Less social media.
Social media? What would you say?
I mean, that's just a personal thing. But, like, you know, I've never been that comfortable with it. But that's me, you know, like, it works great for other people.
What do you mean in terms of people posing or the fake side of it, or?
I know this is the last question, we're supposed to be wrapping up, but this is a whole subject entirely for me. Like, I could be here for hours.
Okay, maybe not that long, but.
I don't know. I mean, look, don't get me wrong, it's done some amazing things. You know, like, it raises awareness for charities and things like that. So I'm not knocking it for that. I just think that, the fakeness needs to just be booted out. And I think people need to stop being so fixated on the amount, like the amount of likes, the amount of comments, the amount of followers, the amount of this, and doing things on it that they know will get that. Like, try and just work on quality stuff. And do good quality things, and just be a decent person, and the rest will come.
That's not take you further than a hit track.
I mean, look, if you could write a hit record, if you could spend your time focusing on writing as good a music as you possibly can, it all starts there anyway, right? So if you can't make great music, what's the point? Or eventually make great music. You're not going to make great music to start with, but you see what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of what's the point. So it's like, and if you can get that track signed to a label, then, you know, and they do the job that they need to do, people will start following you anyway. You know?
Small wins over time.
I mean, look, I come from a world where social media didn't exist. So I remember what it was like before, and I know what it's like now. And it's hand on heart, it's been really difficult for me personally to adjust to all of this. Just for my own beliefs about society as well, and the whole social kind of media thing. And I just think there's too much focus on that. And let's just try and do good quality stuff.
Awesome.
But that's my view.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there who will disagree with me, and maybe they'll teach me something at the same time. So. And I'll change my mind completely.
No, I agree with that, because at the end of the day, it's the music industry, so what matters is the music.
Yeah.
And it comes down to that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you're not an artist without it.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. Yeah.
Try and make it as good as you can.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show, John. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's been interesting to hear the insight of everything from the paper rounds to playing at Greenfield. So, yeah, thanks a lot, John.
Thanks very much for having me. Cheers.